Hey everybody, and welcome to Notes from the Underground. This is a podcast for people who love Jesus but have some questions about Christianity. Here at Notes, we take a microscope to some of Christianity's thornier topics and people, using a progressive theological lens and a socio-historical approach to studying the Bible. So if that sounds like you, come on in and have a seat. But buckle up, it might get bumpy.
Welcome back to the Burrows of Berea. I am Rick Welch, and across from me is Tiziana Severse, the mom who moms so hard.
Clean your room.
That was good.
Laughing behind the glasses, Rocket Man Andy Bishop.
That was a good one.
It was, actually.
I liked it.
Yeah.
I miss this. Like, we only do this like once a month, and so... But it is what it is, you know. I miss you guys. It's fun. Well, not Andy.
I
see
get
Andy
really
constantly.
excited.
Yeah, I don't miss you either, Rick. So there.
I see Andy constantly, but yeah, I like having you in studio, Tiziana.
I like being here.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And we are getting back into Samson and Delilah, and I've been chomping at the bit. And you sent me in a really cool email, and I think we should get into that to start with.
Yeah. So after we recorded the last episode, you know, there was a text chain happening between you and Andy and I. And Andy was real curious about the significance of the lion and why the lion and what does that mean specifically.
Well, it's just my whole thing of I don't feel like a lion is a corpse because an animal is food.
Well,
Yes.
so I started thinking about that. And what started me on this process was like, well, now hold on a second, because one of the other most well-known lifelong Nazarites in the Bible is Samuel. Samuel's mother, Hannah, was barren and went to the temple every year and cried out to God. And when the priest Eli was like, "You're drunk," she was like, "No, I'm just that desperate for a baby. And if I have a baby, I will bring him here and I will dedicate him to the Lord. So I will make him a Nazarite." Sure enough, she gets pregnant. She brings Samuel to the priest when he is weaned, which is probably between 2 and 3, and then leaves him there. And it says that he began serving and acting as like an assistant in the activities of the temple from that time. Let me see if I can find the exact verse.
No,
The specific language, I think, is important.
I'm curious. She was desperate for a baby to give up, apparently. Is that what happened?
She was desperate for a child, and she told God that if he would give her a child, that she would return the child to him. It was basically opening up her womb. She was barren, and so in her mind, if God blessed her with a child,
Okay.
she would give it back,
All
and then
right,
she would,
all right,
and she
that's-
did. She continued to have more children.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she had lots of kids after that. And so, a lot of times it's kind of like the first one is what opens the
Opened it
floodgates,
up,
as
yeah.
it were.
Mhm.
But he says he regularly ministered before the Lord. That's Samuel 2:18 and then 3:1. When you are ministering before the Lord in the temple, oftentimes, most of the time, that included sacrifices. That's what that was. And because the priests were the ones that made sacrifices for the atonement of the people. And so if you go on further down, when Samuel then anoints Saul as the new king of Israel, there's a battle happening. And Samuel says, "Hold on a second. I'm going to meet y'all at Gilgal and we'll sacrifice to the Lord." But Samuel tarries. He doesn't get there when he says he's going to get there. So Saul is like, "Screw it. I'm going to do it myself." And he sacrifices to the Lord right as Samuel is approaching. And Samuel's like, "What have you done? You're not a priest. You've disobeyed." So right there, we know that Samuel was not only regularly offering burnt offerings, which included touching dead animals, but anyone else who did it that wasn't a priest is going to be in trouble. So I started like going, well, what does that mean? So I reached out to my Hebrew Bible professor, and I asked him his
Good
opinion.
resource to have, right?
Yeah, well, he also speaks Hebrew. He speaks fluent Hebrew. So when he reads the Old Testament and when he reads the Hebrew Bible, he reads it
In Hebrew.
you know? And
That's
so I was like, what does this mean? And I do not, in fact, speak Hebrew. So he responded with...
I speak it, I just don't understand it.
Right. But it's like the only other language I speak beside English is Spanish. And so anytime I see anything like written in like French or like, I tend to like try to read it like it's Spanish because that's the only other language I know.
This is not English, so it's clearly the other language.
So my professor said that the word
That
used...
was funny.
Yeah. But I mean, it's like, I'm going to try to read Hebrew with a Spanish accent because it's like the only other accent I know. So he said that in Judges 14:9, the word that's used for the carcass of the lion is the same Hebrew word, and it's gwh, I suppose, that's used to describe a human body. Whereas number 66 prohibits a Nazarite from contact with a NPSMT, Nipistmnut.
I don't know. I couldn't
No, I
even
don't
begin.
speak Hebrew.
It didn't sound Spanish.
That
Can you-
didn't
No.
sound Spanish
That
at
sounded
all.
like
I feel like I've been lied to.
Czechoslovakian, you know?
Yeah, but actually,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so he said, which is the Hebrew word for a corpse. So he said that that the two words are completely different and not the same thing.
Huh.
So I then did a little Googling and dug into the Babylonian Talmud, which is after the exile and all the scholars and scribes and artists were taken away to Babylon, and they left the poorest of the poor to tend the land
Yeah,
in
this is
Jerusalem.
the Israelites during the Nebuchadnezzar thing we talked about.
Okay.
Yeah.
They've exiled them
They've exiled
to
them.
Babylon.
During that period of time, because so much of Israel's worship of their God was centered around the temple and temple life. And now here they are exiled out of the temple. So they spent a lot of time sort of debating the finer points of the law. And so in the Babylonian Talmud, there's this whole section on Nazarites and what is the difference between a lifelong Nazarite and another Nazarite, blah, 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 blah. And that this particular question comes up again as well, like whether or not an animal is a corpse or not. And so they and it's a back and forth. So there's multiple rabbis that are
So this is from the
discussing.
Talmud,
This is
right?
from the Talmud.
Okay.
And they couldn't quite. They were like went back and forth about it too. And so they also decided that touching a dead animal was not the same as touching a corpse.
Which tells you what a great question you had, Andy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
because,
like
yeah, they've
rabbi
been
level
debating it a long
questioning
time
here.
ago.
Yeah.
Although they did come to an answer, but it was a question that was asked by
Yeah.
important people that were important in the
Yeah.
structure.
Now, if you look at the story itself, what's significant about the lion and the honey is the fact that he used it as an opportunity to make a riddle that was unsolvable.
Yeah.
And when he says to his wife, I didn't even tell my parents, that's when we go back to him giving the honey to the parents and not telling them where it came from. So
I still say the story is a metaphor about him learning that violence is going to be profitable for him.
it's yes, and I think it is significant that he's walking through the vineyard. You're not really you aren't supposed to do that. Like you're not even supposed to touch the grape skins. Like again, in the Talmud, they do this whole thing where they're like, was it an olive-sized amount or is it less than that? You know, so they
Right.
and they get to this thing where they're like, all right, just don't. You know, so that's an issue. I don't. So I don't think the walking through the vineyard. It's more like like a metaphor for in temptation.
Not
Yeah.
even supposed to be there.
You're not even supposed to be there.
Pushing
you know,
the envelope.
pushing the
I'm
envelope.
not touching it,
And it's
Lord. I'm not touching it. I'm just
interesting.
walking amongst
right.
it.
I'm just looking.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like when your brother puts their palm of their hand like right up next to your nose and you're like, Mom, it's like, I'm not touching her. Right. But the fact that the lion roars in at that point, you know, and then the Spirit of the Lord comes on Samson. So even in the face of great temptation, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him and he's powerful enough to kill the lion. But I think that I think he knew what he was planning to do. Like he didn't decide off the dome at the moment to trick the Philistines.
Right.
He thought of that. And, that was in advance. And so I think that it's a larger picture of Samson's character and Samson's sort of wily nature and his trickery, because he didn't tell his parents so that they wouldn't possibly know, so that it could be like that he was the only one that knew the answer to this riddle.
Yeah.
And so I think it has more to do with that.
And first of all, thank you for doing that much research because
that's
and for
amazing.
reaching out
That is.
because it changed. I'm changing my beliefs. I like that because a lot of times we get stuck. We read words and we think, okay, this is the way it is, but it's not so in the Hebrew culture.
Yeah.
I'm learning that more and more and more. I find out that wow, like. There's a lot to this that we don't even realize that the Bible is packed with that stuff and we're unpacking it with an English speaking mind in America, and so we don't even see the culture.
No.
And
the thing is that the Bible, what we consider the Hebrew Bible, you've got, the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books,
Yep.
right? Then you have the Deuteronomic history, and then you have these divided up periods of time, and even the language within those different books is different and signifies
That's how
more
far
and more
apart they were.
ancient,
Yeah.
more and more ancient cultural beliefs. And so it's also important to dig in what were the more ancient cultural beliefs at this time, because God in the third person plural disappears
Yeah.
after the Pentateuch.
Yeah,
And
that's fascinating.
But a lot of Hebrew scholars look at that and go, okay, well, what changed in their belief system as well?
Yeah.
And so it's the difference. Someone said this to me the other day about died. You have to consider cultural context because a booty call and a butt dial are not the same thing.
Yep. That's
Oh
true.
yeah. I think I read that recently or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I read
just
that.
like online.
Something being the bomb versus dropping a bomb, totally different things.
Yeah, a booty call and a butt dial though. That's the perfect one.
Oh, it's perfect.
That's perfect.
But, I mean, the bomb versus a bomb. That is just the difference of a participle, right? Isn't that the
Yeah.
A dangling
I
one.
don't know. Have you ever seen me try to spell? I don't know
A
what you
dangling
mean.
participle.
Those are my favorite. But I'm just saying. But I'm just saying, like, and a lot of the stuff we run into, especially in the Hebrew Bible, especially in the Greek where there's no punctuation, are those exact same nitty-gritty grammatical issues that change the entire sentence. So that's why I reached out to him. I love that professor. He's great. Him and his wife are awesome.
Yeah, so it
So cool.
changes.
She's a Jewish woman who's a New Testament scholar, and he is a Protestant Christian man who is an Old Testament scholar.
They
Yeah.
were
Great
meant
mix.
to be.
They're great.
Yeah.
I love them.
That's awesome. Talk about interpreting.
Yeah, and they're
for
both
each
just
other.
brilliant, beyond brilliant.
That's
So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's good because that changes a little bit. Because we should probably do a recap, guys. It's been a while since they've listened to Samson and Delilah. So I did it in song format.
Oh, he did.
I wrote
Are
a
you
little
ready?
song for you.
Oh,
Are you ready?
I'm so excited.
Here we go. Think of the tune of "Devil Went Down to Georgia."
Yeah. Okay.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. There you go.
So Samson went down to Timnah. He was looking for a heifer to steal. He was among the vines. He killed a lion and got honey out of the deal.
That's amazing.
That's all I got.
Oh, you gotta keep going. There's gotta be more.
No, I'm sure there is.
That's great. But that's a good recap of where we're at.
Yeah, so basically that's where we were at, And so we were about to get into Judges 15. And where we were was he tells the riddle and they plow his heifer and they get it, and they get the answer. And so now he's pissed. And he was married. I thought that betrothal, was it not? Was it not? The marriage actually happened. That was the marriage supper that they were doing it at. So he was married.
So Samson was married.
Samson was married.
We talked about
Right.
where she.
Because
got
I was
what-
curious because it just kept saying betrothed, and I understand in their culture betrothal means marriage. I mean, it really does.
Right.
But they go away and then they come back and they get you in that culture. I don't know about the Philistines, but I know in the Israelite culture, there's like a year waiting period.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know if he consummated the marriage or not because he stormed off in a huff.
But he doesn't, because we learned that in Judges 15. He actually
that's right.
didn't get to consummate.
Right.
He actually storms off angry and he kills all these men and he steals their clothes and
Right.
pays off the bet from losing the riddle game there. He did.
Yeah.
So that's where we're actually picking up. So we've got to that point.
Which that's really interesting too, because we're talking about whether or not, so that the significance of the lion, the question is whether or not Samson was upholding his Nazirite vow.
Right.
We had originally said no.
Right.
Touching the body of the lion by scooping the honey out was a violation of number 6:6, don't touch a corpse. And so he was no longer honoring his Nazirite vow.
Right.
We've changed our position on that.
That's correct.
However, murdering a bunch
Murder.
of Philistines and stripping them of their clothing, that
Seems-
right
that's
there,
pretty
folks,
clear.
that seems pretty darn clear.
So-
and that's something they
That's a
argue about
corpse.
in the Talmud as well.
Sure.
They're like, well, what if he killed them,
Is it? Yeah.
but they weren't quite dead, and then
Oh
he
my
took the
God.
clothes off, and then they died.
I was waiting for the argument to come out like, well, if you killed them, then you can take their clothes.
Yeah, so that comes up.
But if you think about it, when he kills the lion, the spirit of the Lord comes upon him, and then he kills him. So in the case where he goes down and he starts wiping out those dudes, it says again. He says, if you had not plowed my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and struck down 30 men of the town. So the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him in both cases.
That is
So
interesting.
that's why I think those rabbis are like, well, wait a minute. If the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, can he make him break his vow?
That's the thing, right? I mean, David and them eat their consecrated bread.
Yeah.
Those
are those moments where
Tamar goes and dresses up as a prostitute and sleeps with her father-in-law, which not sleeping with your father-in-law is a big, I mean, like when you look at the sexual purity laws in Leviticus,
Right.
Don't sleep with your father's husband. Don't sleep with your father's wife. Don't sleep with your brother's
Very
wife. Like,
modern.
there's a lot of like, don't do all that stuff. So you have all these examples already in the Hebrew Bible of people who are supposed to follow certain rules and then breaking them. But I think about like, because this is a real struggle. This is a struggle for me, Rick, honestly, to
Yeah.
see that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. I tend to look at it as when God's given you a gift, you have that gift.
So that spark of the divine that you talk about,
Yeah.
that was his spark of the divine.
Yeah, like he had been because the faithfulness of his mother, from the womb, making him a Nazarite and her faithfulness. I think it structured his DNA somehow,
Yeah.
because we'll get to that later, but hair is recycled cellular data.
Mm-hmm.
When your body has a cell that has reached its the end of its life, it commits something called apoptosis. The cell dies, and these little macrophages come into the cell, and they consume and redistribute anything that might still be useful. And what's left over is keratin protein. And keratin protein turns into hair and fingernails. It's your body's recycling system.
Yep.
Wow, that's cool.
So there's something that was so whatever Samson did or didn't do, there was something about that agreement made in the womb on a cellular DNA level, that existed in his hair.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it made it possible for him, because that's the other thing you talk about in the Talmud. There must be a difference between these lifelong Nazarites and these ones that make it for a time, even though there's no description of that in the Levitical and laws and numbers. Sorry, numbers.
All I do is stutter.
Right? Okay, thanks. That was feel better. But I mean, so in the absence of a description, we just have to look at what happened.
Yeah.
And go, okay, well, maybe lifelong Nazarites can touch dead bodies.
Well, let's zoom out. Let's zoom out
interesting.
for a second, okay? So we're hyper focused on Judges 14 and where we are and all this, okay?
Yeah.
So let's zoom back out and remember, number one, it's a religious story. Number two, this is Yahweh versus Dagon.
Yeah.
He's going after the Philistines.
Yeah.
So whenever God has a man going to do something towards his enemy, I'm sure that the vow, there's some flexibility in what's going on. I assume. I don't know. But what we do
that's
know,
how I would play it if I was going to make that argument. Like God, God could make those decisions.
yeah, well, he's going after Dagon. He's going through these people that are quote unquote oppressing his people on their land. So he's using Samson.
Yeah.
He's using all of his anger, his sexual desire, his lust, his ego. Yeah, all of it. He's using all of him.
Yeah.
And every time he does, a bunch of Philistines get whacked.
Which is so interesting. So I really, really wanted to say that Samson broke his Nazarite vow and so he sucks. I really wanted to say that. I was very excited about that. But I don't think I can.
I don't think I can. I still think he broke it here. The question is whether or not the Lord gives him a hall pass to murder 30 people.
And that's what I'm talking about. I really wanted to be like, me. He didn't respect me.
Well,
but
let's
maybe...
see. Let's see what kind of a hall pass he gives him in Judges chapter 15.
All
You're
right,
going to enjoy this one. You ready?
Oh, okay, yeah.
So let's get into that. So at this point now, he is off. He's super pissed. He's killed all these guys.
Yeah.
And so he needs to go consummate the marriage. That's where we're at.
Yeah.
Okay. He's married. So Judges 15, 1 through 8. After some days, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife with a young goat. And he said, I will go into my wife in the chamber. But her father would not allow him to go in. And her father said, I really thought that you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. So Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches. And he turned them tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and set fire to the stacked grain and the standing grain, as well as the olive orchards.
Oh, Jesus Christ, that's horrible on so many levels.
Then the Philistines said, who has done this? And they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite. So he definitely was married, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. And Samson said to them, if this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you. And after that, I will quit. And he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow. And he went down and stayed in the cleft of the rock of Etam. So, boy, here we go. Oof. And it's getting ready to amp up even more. Like, I love this story. So what's happening is dad's like, I thought that you obviously didn't love my daughter. You just walked out. So he's coming back with a young goat, and the young goat stuck out. What's that about?
Is it a sacrifice?
I was wondering if it was a sacrifice. Like, is that what happens when you go to get ready to consummate? You like tear a young goat and burn it and then go have...
like that's a question for Levitical law, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that the solution to that might just be buried somewhere. It might have also been he brought it to slaughter and for a feast.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been...
Because imagine if your husband walked up and gave you a young goat now.
Oh, I'd
be
be thrilled.
I know. We'd be like, oh, it's a goat.
You guys
So
got enough.
romantic.
Yeah. You guys got enough. I would solve
That's
some grass
romantic.
problems. You guys got a big lawn that's not flat, too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, listen. Yeah.
Yeah.
If Dylan brought home a goat, I'd be like, you're a genius.
Yeah.
We don't
have to
never have
weed
to mow
eat
again.
again.
Yeah. So there's lots of reasons. I mean, I think there's lots of potential. I mean, it might have been bringing the young goat was a sign of sort of some repentance on his part to bring a goat to slaughter and have a feast. He didn't come empty handed.
Right.
Because I'm digging through my brain. I'm not recalling any particular sacrifices required at a marriage ceremony.
Yeah, I don't know. So he brings a young goat. We know that. He gets there and the father-in-law stops him and is like, look, and in some of the other Bibles I've read, this companion actually means best man.
Mm-hmm.
It was the best man of his wedding that his wife was given to. So she's already consummated another marriage with his best man while he was down pouting. And so he comes back with the goat. He's ready to do his thing. And the father-in-law has done this. And so because of that, he gets super pissed.
He says, this time I will be innocent, which seems to recognize
He
that
knows the
last
guilt.
time I shouldn't have done what I did.
That's right.
He might be experiencing a little remorse and regret that he did what he did.
Yeah, he's went down. He's blown off some steam. He's one of those guys that kicks the wife down the stairs and says, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
I mean, let's look at it.
That's
Because
true.
now he's like, now if I do it, I'm innocent this time. Right?
Right.
He's sort of a narcissist. Right? So then...
Gaslighter.
There you go.
It was your fault I killed 30 dudes last
Totally.
time.
Now, I want you to notice
Totally.
that the standing grain means they've already done all the planting, the hard work. They've got it. It's about harvest time.
Yeah.
It's ready to harvest.
Well, and
and
they
this
said that
is-
when he goes down, when the wheat is ready to
when
harvest,
he
he
was
goes
ready to
down.
harvest,
Yeah.
So
That's
he...
devastating.
Oh, God.
That's a devastating
Oh,
economic
yeah,
blow.
that's
That
brutal.
women and children are going to starve to death now.
I got to tell you something. For the first time in my life, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but I grew a garden this year. I've never done it. My wife introduced me to gardening, and so I've got corns, like green beans and squash and zucchini and all this stuff. And let me tell you something. There's some work that goes into this thing. Like, you really got to, I mean, it's not just like, you got to tend it and you got to work it. And then when you finally you start seeing the fruits, right, starting to come off, right? And then you go to bed and you get up the next day and a wild turkey has destroyed all of your corn. Like,
Oh, no.
all I could think about was I could strangle it
Yeah.
just so that I could get the joy out of watching it die after it killed all my
Yeah.
stuff. And listen, I don't even care for corn, but it was just like all
All
of
that
that work.
work.
Now imagine your entire harvest.
That's not even what you depend on to live.
I'm not going to depend on it.
Yeah,
This is
you
for
can,
fun.
in a last ditch effort, you can go to Chick-fil-A.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I was going to,
Yeah.
the corn would probably end up in some sort of a salsa
Yeah.
for me,
Right.
you
But,
know?
yeah, now imagine if your life and the lives of your children literally depended on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I got to use a Tiziana phrase. The fact that he tied those 300 foxtails together took a minute.
That took a minute.
Took a minute.
Right? Like, he thought he was that mad.
This is a vengeful man.
Also, 300 foxes died.
That's right.
Well, were burned alive as they ran
Terrified.
terrified. We're burned.
Yeah.
And I want you to note, it doesn't say the Spirit of the Lord came upon him to do it. So
Yeah.
now we got Samson in his full anger.
Yeah.
And he's killing animals. He's destroying harvests.
Yeah.
He's doing
Yeah,
everything. Like, he is literally on a war
We're
path.
getting a little bit of a sense of the ego and the vengeful nature of this man outside of when God chooses to utilize those for his purposes.
So,
yeah.
do you remember from our very first part of this
Yeah.
what Dagon means, what the word was?
Yeah. It was the harvest.
It's grain.
Yeah. He was the
grain
god of grain and harvest. Mhm.
So
yeah.
what's happening here
Yeah.
is you got to think again.
Yeah.
God is
Yeah.
using this man and he's going directly at the heart of who that God was.
Right.
He's destroying the harvest. So
Yeah.
this is,
Right.
it's Samson's a lot more than just he got his hair cut, right?
Yeah, Samson had
so
no
much
idea
more.
too. Like, and that just is like a huge metaphor also for the times and ways that we have no idea what God's doing and we're just a tool.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now he has done all this, and he strikes the people. He's like, I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit. And he does. Hip and thigh is what they use in the Old Testament. Like, that means he just stomped him good. You see, Andy's
Yeah.
petting the cat like the Godfather.
I know.
What is it? Is it Greg?
Yes, sometimes Gregula or Evil Greg.
Gregula.
Y'all at home are missing out on the cutest little kitten.
Yeah, the tootie putty tat.
You can hear how cute he is.
He's so cute.
He's getting big so fast. Sorry.
So, no,
I'm not
I love
sorry.
it. Me either. So now let's see what happens here. All right, so Samson is technically a wanted man at this point. He's hiding in the cleft of a rock because he's in hiding. He's on the run. And so he's kind of a long-haired, crazy, strong Foxfire bit of man, right? So on a warpath. So let's go on. Judges 15, 9 through 20. Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah. As you said, they were next door neighbors to the Danites, and made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? They said, we have come up to bind Samson, to do to him as he did to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock at Etam and said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so have I done to them. Now, is that true? Yeah, right. And they said to him, we have come down to bind you that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. Now, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
His own people are coming down to bind him because he's a wanted man, and they're afraid of the Philistines, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, they're afraid of the Philistines, and also Samson was being a jerk.
Right.
Yeah, I think
so, like,
it was so.
yeah,
That's so wildly beyond
what
the
he
pale.
did was so
Yeah.
much. And so they're like, look, these guys are scary. They are right next door to us.
They're
Like, they could
fighting
really
us.
harm us. Like, we don't want to provoke these people more than we should have. And like, you just did this crazy, ridiculous thing. And so, if your death is going to solve all of our problems, then like, go on ahead, sir.
I just realized what the young goat was for. It was a peace offering.
Yeah.
And that's what they're about to do with him.
That makes sense. Yes, because that's what I was
They're
saying.
gonna
Maybe
bring
he was
him up.
fearing some remorse and said, let's bring you this goat. I'll slaughter it. We'll have some food.
And so they're doing the same with him now.
Yeah.
They're going to
Yeah.
bring him up to bring peace.
As a peace offering. Yeah.
Ooh, I like it. So let's see where we go. So they said to him, so Samson says to them, swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves. Like, don't kill me and take me up there. They said to him, no, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will surely not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands, and he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and put out his hand and took it, and with it he struck 1,000 men. And Samson said, and I did the math, by the way. I'll tell you the math here in a second. And Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heap upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey have I struck down 1,000 men. As soon as he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hand, and that place was called Ramath Lehi. And he was very thirsty, and he called upon the Lord and said, you have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? And God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore, the name of it was called En Hakor, the spring of him who called. It is at Lehi to this day, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. So that's the end of 15.
Mm-hmm. He just drops the jawbone like mic drop. Boom.
Yeah, donkey drop.
Just done.
Beat 1,000 people with a jawbone.
That's exactly right. And so
Yeah.
if you think about it, so I was thinking about how long does this last? It doesn't really tell you. Like how long it lasts, right? So if I take 24 hours and divide it by 1,000 men, that he's killing 0.02 men every second. Let me do this by minutes. So 24 times 60 is 1,440 minutes in a day. So that's less than one a minute. He's killing less than one a minute with the jawbone of an ass, right?
For 24 full
killed
hours.
1,000 men.
Killed or striking?
He killed 1,000 men.
Killed 1,000 men.
They're all dead. So
Yeah.
that's less than a man per. I mean, that's more than a man per second.
What?
I mean per minute.
Per minute.
Per
Yeah,
minute.
that makes much more sense.
For
But still.
24 full hours.
That's 24 hours
Well,
of
if
killing.
he did it in 24 hours. And I don't know, like.
Maybe he did it in.
Yeah.
Is it this one of those Old Testament numbers things?
Yeah, because I mean, like.
It was more like 10 men, but they called it 1,000.
They do that.
Let's
be honest.
We do know that.
There's actually a lot of evidence that there was a Hebrew presence in Israel, that somehow or another escaped, but not in the numbers that they say.
Right.
So I don't, listen. I caught a fish and it was this big,
Right.
Like, so it's but it doesn't matter. He still took a jawbone. Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He broke the binds like flax and just beat the tar out of a bunch of folk. However many it was a lot.
It was enough
Was
to
a
where
lot
when he
more
was
than
done, he was
Yeah.
so thirsty that he was at the point of death.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, like,
Yeah.
the labor
Hagar can
of a
imagine.
physical fight?
Hagar and Ishmael can imagine.
Not that I've been in
Yeah.
a lot of them, but the labor of a physical fight is intense.
Yeah.
That's why those UFC fighters train their entire lives to stay standing up for 20 minutes.
Greg is all about your
It
cord,
is so
and he's
cute.
jumping on him
Y'all,
and grabbing.
this tiny kitten is like jumping on Andy's headphone cord and like leaping into the air and grabbing onto his pants and hanging free fall. It's really cute.
Yeah, I'm trying not to let it break
It's
my
really
thought.
cute. But yeah, so but so I make the mention of Hagar and Ishmael, who also cried out and was like, you did this, like you owe us. This is not our fault.
If you're not
This
familiar
is
with the
not
story,
our
this
fault.
is Abraham was promised a son, and through
with
his wife Sarah,
who was old
who was barren,
and barren.
but it doesn't happen in his timing, and so he goes.
Sarah's timing.
And
Abraham didn't have anything to do with that. Sarah's the one that's like, take Hagar.
yeah, no. I guess that's what I meant in man's timing. Like they weren't being patient enough to wait on God.
Yeah, Sarah wasn't being patient enough to
Yeah.
wait on God. That's one of the few times where I will blame a woman.
Yeah, and then she throws him
You
out.
won't hear me do that often.
Like she was a nagging wife and told Abraham, "Get him out of here."
Yeah, because then when she finally had her own baby,
Yeah.
she was like, "Oh, that servant woman." So they kicked him out, and they were wandering in the desert, and she cried out to
They were at
the
the point of
Lord
death.
because they were on the point of death from the dying of thirst. I mean, the
in the
desert. Yeah, and God opens a spring, and Ishmael and his way. So I mean, I think that's like there's also something to be said there too about God doing that.
But we're learning a lot about Samson
Yeah.
himself. We do know that he is an incredibly powerful man
Mm-hmm.
when the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, especially.
But he has that ego like that. But that's what I mean when I'm saying that sometimes when God gives you a gift, it's just embedded in your DNA.
Yeah.
Because he could utilize that gift even when he didn't have the Spirit of the Lord.
Hmm.
So when the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, all of a sudden, that's when he's using that gift in that religious setting, fighting. It's the big battle between Hashem and Dagon at that point. But even when it's not part of the story of God saying, I'm ruler even over this other God, Samson can still, knock some heads.
It's
That's
still
right.
a hammer, even when you put it
Yeah,
down.
still a hammer. Yeah, so it's
he's
interesting.
he's destroyed a harvest.
Yeah.
He's destroyed 1,000 of their men.
He's caused the murder of his wife and father-in-law who were absolutely 100% innocent throughout this entire experience.
That's exactly right. They got caught up in the Samson problem,
yeah.
in his ego.
I wonder if his dad was relieved when Samson stormed off
Probably.
and was like,
He sounds like a treat.
I can give her to the best man who was actually a Philistine, one of our people. I wonder if he kind of had hoped that Samson was,
yeah, like maybe,
Yeah.
maybe
Can you
we
imagine
shouldn't have.
this? I mean, he's a psycho.
I'm a
psychopath.
mother. No, I can't imagine. I would never, under any circumstances, let somebody like that marry my daughter.
Right.
I would, they were pressured on all sides into this, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good place to end this part 3 of this right here.
Okay.
Because I want to take the end of 15 going into 16. It's one of those precious places where they've split a chapter when I feel like you sort of break in the story. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And we're going to go at the end of 15 and go into 16, which is the final chapter about Samson. So we're going to learn a lot more in the next episode. So, but I don't want to end without telling a joke because that's just,
Oh, I have one.
Okay, then I don't want to tell it. I've only got one today, so you tell it in this part.
A really good one.
Okay.
I only believe 12.5% of the Bible.
I think I've heard this, and okay, why?
I guess it makes me one atheist.
Oh.
I love it.
I couldn't wait to say that.
Oh, that just made me think of a number one. Who is the greatest financier in all of the Bible? Noah. While he was floating in all his stocks, the others were in liquidation.
Oh, great. That's good.
That's terrible. All right. Well, thanks for being in studio, Tiziana. And Andy, thanks so much. I know we've got a big week ahead of us.
This cat's climbing my leg.
Gregula. That is so cute.
Yeah, very exciting this weekend. I don't know what order they're hearing things in, but
yeah, they'll have already heard this before they actually get into it. We're going to Virginia Beach, and we're recording 6 men, and it's going to be awesome. I'm very excited.
You two are?
Yeah. Well, me and actually the Burrows are going.
Oh, road trip.
Yep.
Road trip.
Yep.
Okay.
We'll take notes for the underground on a road trip.
Okay.
We'll do it.
Okay.
How about Maui? I think that's a very religious place that we should go record a podcast at.
Not Maui.
That's my stomping grounds.
Sorry, I don't have the money.
That's where I went to high school. Yeah, I went to high school in Maui.
I wasn't even thinking.
You weren't even thinking about that, but that actually, we do have lots of connections there. We could have an interesting podcast. I would probably fight with everybody.
Flight,
but
yeah. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Tiziana, Andy, thanks for being here, and we will talk to you next time on the Burrows of Berea.
Sweet.
See ya. Hey guys, this is Rick from the Burrows of Berea. Do you know how much blood, sweat, and tears it takes to make a podcast? None. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't cost a lot. And so if you guys don't mind, if anybody would like to give to help us with these episodes, it would be great. We'll put out even more content. And if you go to our Patreon page, just search for the Burrows of Berea, you'll get extra notes, extra episodes, and it's pretty much free. $1 gets you a lot. Thanks, guys.
The land lie fallow.
Yeah.
So I just laughed at that, and I was like, Lord, you're just giving me such a gift. You're telling me not only am I been given permission to just not work right now, you're telling me that my faithfulness to not work and just focus on these babies is actually part of your grander plan for me. Because what happens when you let the land lie fallow? It rejuvenates.
That's right. It brings the health back.
It brings the health back. And so God was like, girl, just fucking relax. Can you just relax? So I'm doing that. And I'm talking to my friend Ashley the other day, and she was just like, I'm listening to her, this miracles. And finally God goes, are you listening to this? And I was like, yeah. And God goes, when you're ready to get back into the workforce, I will do the same thing for you. Stop worrying so much.
Yeah.
And I started bawling. So we're not worried about the
finances.
The finances part. Well, the life insurance part was a big deal. That's actually a really big deal for us because his job is dangerous. So, but again, that once we got that sorted out, and we have this great plan that we'll have the accidental death insurance until we're 80, and it covers any kind of accident. So if he gets electrocuted at work, if he falls off a ladder, if there's some kind of electrical whatever, anything that's not related to a physical ailment. So if he gets cancer, it's not a big deal. But if he dies of anything at all, we'll get the $250,000. And if he doesn't die after 30 years, we can cancel and we just get all our premiums back. So then it'll be like a savings plan.
That's nice.
Yeah. And so both of us just were like, because his job is funny. We can't live without insurance.
Like we can study ancient, like you can read the Babylonian Talmud and all this stuff. I cannot navigate insurance.
Yeah.
I can read the Bible, but I cannot navigate insurance.
Yeah.
Well,
and I'm barely good at it, because I started that job in November, but same thing, like, it's just like every time I was booking appointments and then like kid would be out of school, or I was, or I was booking appointments and then I would have like a horrible day where I was sick to my stomach. So I wasn't honoring the Jubilee year.
Mm.
And so.
Of course, you couldn't honor what you didn't know. Once you learned it, then.
Right. Exactly. But the thing is, God had been telling me to stop and just breast, And so I was like, okay, maybe it just means stop doing hair. Maybe it didn't mean stop all the way. Right.
And I think it'll work. I need
Well, the thing
headphones.
is that now that Dylan's not working at a toxic job that is wrapped in and around like a bunch of toxic masculinity, that the only thing you really bring to the table as a man is work.
Yeah.
Now that he's outside of that situation, he'll be home by 5:00. So I can come do an evening podcast.
Yeah.
And I did think about, I would love to do the next Notes from the Underground on Mary Magdalene, and head that up.
You do the lead.
Yeah, because one of the things I think is what I'm curious about is this concept that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. It doesn't say that anywhere.
No, she had 7 demons.
But that's all it says.
And nothing about prostitution.
Right. And there's a lot of like assumptions
Mm-hmm.
that the woman of ill repute that comes to Jesus when he's at the Pharisee supper and anoints his head with the expensive oil. And the Pharisees are like, oh, if they knew who she was, a lot of people assume that's Mary Magdalene, but the Bible doesn't say that.
No.
It doesn't say that.
No.
And actually, I've been doing some research in general on like the history of women in the church, not in the Bible, but in the period of time directly following the death of Christ and the establishment of the church. We've found inscriptions in Hebrew temples that are venerating women priests and women patrons. There's been numerous gravestones found where the same word used to describe like a deacon or a church planter is used to describe women. It wasn't until much later that women were removed from places of leadership and authority. Women
It was
having
the Catholic Church that stopped it.
right. So women being wealthy patrons, even Paul addresses in Paul's letters all of the time. He's constantly addressing women leaders of the church. He's constantly addressing women patrons of the church.
Priscilla.
So there's nothing that and saying their names first, which is an issue, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's only
I didn't even
English
think of that. That's a good
translations
point.
that moved the word deacon that we used to describe like an elder and leader in the church. Now, of course, you have that in 1 Timothy that women shouldn't this and women shouldn't that. And that's where you get a lot of the like anti-feminist approaches. But Timothy wasn't written by Paul.
It says it is though, right?
Well, it says that it is.
At the very beginning.
But pseudepigrapha was a big part of those old ancient letters. And Greek scholars have done comparative studies like on the way that it was written, certain languages that Paul uses. There's the undisputed letters, the undisputed epistles. There's the, I don't know, maybe epistles. And then there's no way he wrote this epistles. And First Timothy is one of them. So I tend to appreciate First Timothy in terms of this was a specific issue maybe facing this particular congregation where they had some gender issues and some gender roles that were challenging. When you look into gender roles and gender ideology of the day, like I can appreciate that. I don't think that was supposed to be for everybody.
There was I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
There was an entire group of women. There were women priests for a pagan god, and their form of worship was shout down. And what they did was they didn't allow men to speak. It was the opposite. And they would shout men down. And so I think what they were battling was, okay, we're not going to allow that. It's not about women talking, but of course, you let man get a hold of anything long enough, they'll turn it into a
and another thing that's really
exactly.
Another thing that's really interesting. When I was in Spain the first time, there's a town called Toledo, Spain, and Toledo's a really important town because at various points in time, it was like had a big Jewish congregation, had a big Muslim congregation, and it had a big Christian congregation. And it's called like the City of Peace, because they just decided we're not going to do this whole thing where we fight with each other about that. We're just going to be here. And so one of the oldest Jewish synagogues is there. And so when you're in that church, you can also see that there was seating above and there was seating below. Well, the women sat up here and the men sat down here. And so if women were going to ask a question, they were going to be like shouting down from these top. I mean, you can see it when you walk into the church. It's how it was built. And so there's also that.
Yeah.
Too. So there's all these cultural reasons. But in that regard, I think it's misogyny that likes to label Mary Magdalene as a prostitute because it's convenient. It gives us the opportunity to downplay her power. It's also...
I never thought of that as a slight against her. I always thought it was a compliment to the character of Jesus. And maybe that comes from not being a woman, but I wasn't like,
Yeah.
oh, that bitch was a hoe.
Right.
No, I was like, see, Jesus didn't give a shit.
Well, Jesus didn't give a shit. But even then, it's like, it turns it into a compliment of Jesus' character instead of a compliment of Mary Magdalene's
No,
character.
that's fair. No,
And
obviously.
so even in that regard, it takes the
that's
focus
true.
away from her being a human being that had enough finances to financially support the movement.
Yeah. Among other women.
Yeah.
It was women that supported his ministry.
Yeah. And the
Luke
fact
chapter 8.
that, what's interesting, if you read the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which we will bring into the topic of discussion.
Of course, I hope so.
Yeah. She begins to, in the very beginning.
She's such a raging feminist.
She begins to speak. Yeah.
I love it.
So is Jesus. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm in good company.
Yeah.
But Mary Magdalene begins to speak. And one of the disciples is like, excuse me, female person with a uterus and whatnot. Shut up. And one of the other apostles is like, no, stop. Jesus talked a lot to her privately in ways that he didn't talk to us. This is after Mary Magdalene's gospel begins after the crucifixion of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So it's after, right? And they're like, the guys, I think it might even be Paul, or it might even be Peter. That is like, I think it's Thomas that is like, shut up. And it's Peter that's like, no, wait, hold on a second. He spent a lot of one-on-one time with her. So it is very possible that he said stuff to her that he didn't say to us. And he's gone now. So we need to grasp at any straw. Mm-hmm. Mary, go ahead and tell us what you want to say. The rest of the text is destroyed.
Really?
Yep. The rest of the text
all the way
is
up to
destroyed.
that point. Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
And then she said,
and then it's destroyed.
Yeah. Wow.
That's awful.
Yeah.
I wonder if that was intentional or just time.
Of course it was.
Of
No,
course
it was
it was.
intentional.
It was
The Catholic
100%
Church,
intentional.
I promise
so
you the other half of
brutal.
that is somewhere buried in the Vatican.
Yeah. Well, and it's same with
The catacombs.
Yeah.
the what is it? Proscription that priests remain unmarried as part of the whole Catholic tradition. That's not biblical.
It's not biblical at all.
It's not biblical at all. And it was, again, that was also designed to control women.
By the way,
Mhm.
I've been doing a study through the Berean Bible Church on Thessalonians, and David Curtis brought out something out of First Thessalonians 4 that I'd never heard before. There's a place where he talks about, where Paul says, look, that a man, that it's not acceptable for sexual immorality, that a man should control his body and such, okay? And I'm not going to read it because we're going to get into Samson today. But he says, that's actually a bad translation. Let me show you how to translate this. And it says that we should abstain from sexual immorality, that a man should know when to take a wife.
Oh. Yeah.
In other words, if
Not
you're out
just
there just
beat your
hammering,
body into submission.
so why was it translated control? They use that. The priests take that very literally, and they're like, "Oh, I can't do anything," But for some reason, little boys was okay. I mean, it was a thing. It was real. I'm not just picking on them, guys. It was a real thing.
Yeah.
We know that it happened.
Yeah.
And that it was covered up by the Catholic Church. We know that.
And it's not even just, not even just boys.
They didn't
girls,
even just
children.
children.
All children.
Children.
Oh, I didn't. Well, I was only aware of the boys.
Oh, no. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
it's
been,
just-
so
that's-
the Pope just recently flew to Canada to apologize to a lot of the indigenous population there because of the rampant child sexual abuse. And it was not just boys. What would happen is a priest would get accused in one of their larger dioceses of some such thing, and rather than punish them, they would send them to
That's
the
the
frontiers.
wild part. They didn't fire him. They just
No.
moved him to a
They
place.
moved them to the middle of nowhere,
do you know
which
why
was
they didn't
these
fire 'em?
indigenous populations.
Why?
There's a reason why they didn't fire him.
I didn't know.
Because they take another biblical verse that says that we should not be in a secular court, that we should manage it within ourselves. They've taken yet
but
another verse
your
out of
management
Scripture.
can be firing a fool.
Yeah, for real.
That's the whole point. The whole
but-
point is that, no, actually, it's wrong. They should be taken to a criminal court
absolutely.
because it's
For
a
sure.
crime.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
They weren't talking
That's
about
also
that.
true.
They were just talking
But
about
they wouldn't
religious
even
things.
they wouldn't even just wash their hands of that person, let alone make
put
that
them in a-
person
yeah, they would just move them to
give
the middle of
justice
nowhere.
to the
another
people, the
leadership
victims.
area somewhere else.
But see, that's my issue with purity culture, and that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
I think purity culture is disgusting, and I don't think it's actually biblical. I really don't. I think a lot of especially because we see too many opportunities where people utilize sex outside of the marriage contract, and it's part of God's plan, right? Like I say this all the time, Esther having to spend a night with the king. What do y'all think they were doing in there? Playing Scrabble? They weren't. And like Tamar, who dresses as a prostitute in order to sleep with her father-in-law in order to bring an heir to her children, bring heirs to her dead husbands. And when Tamar is discovered for who she is,
she's righteous.
What does he say? She's righteous. So what I think it has to do with is the fact that girls were married off like immediately when they had their period. Don't have sex with a girl before marriage is don't have sex with a child.
Right.
I think. And I think purity culture has gotten way out of hand. And I'm not saying that sex is not beautiful and powerful and special and should be treated with respect, because I do think that that's the case.
I mean, especially with me.
Absolutely.
That's how I treat it with Rick.
Because he's too hot to hold, baby. Yeah,
that's right.
Gotta watch it. No, but I mean, anytime you create a prohibition, you will create an underground.
Yeah.
We see this with liquor.
I've wondered if, like, on some level, that whole like prohibition / underground, the knock-on effects of sexual prohibition, I've wondered many years if that's on some level not on purpose.
Oh, that's interesting. Like they wanted to.
Yeah, like on some level, like I don't think it's a conscious decision, but I don't know, something about it. You're just like, well, I don't know. That's probably just wild speculation.
Yeah, who made money on it? But I mean, but in the terms of our discussion, you make something taboo, all of a sudden it's the only thing you want, the apple in the garden.
Yeah.
And so creating a taboo around sex and sexuality, it creates a sort of tension that then makes sexuality overblown.
Yeah.
And overexcited. I have 2 daughters. I'm not going to teach them to wait until they're married to have sex. I'm not. I'm going to teach them that sex is sacred, that sex is powerful, that sex creates human beings, that sex is allowing a human being into the temple of your body.
It is difficult to navigate.
It is emotionally and spiritually challenging. I'm going to instill in my daughters the power and the importance of sexuality. And then I'm going to let them go from there. Now, I will hope that if I do it right, they will wait until they are, ready. But I mean, that whole don't have sex till you're married thing got me 23 years old, a virgin, and raped at a birthday party.
Yeah.
Instead of having sex with like my high school boyfriend who I deeply loved.
If there, and I often wonder if we're able to train up our children in the way that they should go, like the scripture says. It says when they're old, they will return to it. That tells you something about what's going to happen in their brains. So we know that, the human brain especially isn't fully formed until 25 or after. And so to say train up a child in the way they should go when they're old, they'll return to it means that we're going to give them we're going to try to instill all the lessons. Because I had premarital sex and, I've been married more than once. And so with the relationship that I'm in right now and how wonderful my relationship is with my wife, we've had these conversations where we're like, I wish you were the one. I wish that I would have met you then. I wish that I had the brain that I have now. And I wish I could have that oneness with you back whenever I was having kids and doing all that. I really wish. I wish. So we do our best to train. And I think it's good that you're taking that incredibly seriously and you want your daughters to know.
Yeah.
Like this is the thing. And, there's no sense in, of course, we could go on for hours. We got to get on to Samson. But I think that, it's a critical thing to sit down with your children and to also be the example, to live the example. And you're right. I mean,
and
when I was 23, I was a madman.
Shit. You just hope that it's on the not so bad side of whack because kids are going to make mistakes.
Kids are going to make mistakes. And
that's right.
I mean, shoot, listen.
Yeah, right.
There's certainly been some sex I regret.
Yeah.
Not all of it, though.
Some of it was really, really good.
Some of it I learned a thing or two about a thing or two, frankly. But I mean,
this is a note from the underground. Let's dig it a little deeper.
I was married before too. I was married before too.
Sure.
And so, so I mean, if I teach them why it's important, if I teach them why it's sacred, if I teach them what it means, they will decide for themselves to wait until it is sacred, to wait until it is important, to wait until it means something.
Yeah.
And
are you going to
that's all
tell
I
them,
want.
and what I'm about to say, this is not up or down judgment.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'm just saying, are you going to tell them like what the sanctity of marriage actually is?
Oh, yeah, of course.
And how God looks at marriage and how we are the bride of Christ. And that is that a lot of the things that are being said in the scriptures are in regard to that relationship, you know, to let them know that, you know, if you can hold out and try to find a spouse that has the same kind of thought that you have, you could have a oneness that doesn't have all the extra stuff to bring with it.
Yeah,
which is
of course.
unique. It would be, I would wish that upon my own kids. I
would want that for them. And I also don't want them to live in a world where there's a lot of judgment that if it doesn't work out that way.
That's right.
And that's the bottom line. Yeah, sure. Because we're all vying for perfection, and not a single one of us hits the nail on the head there.
Nope.
You know?
No.
I mean, and so I think that that's really what I'm trying to say. You know, I mean, her dad and I are married, but I mean, Dylan and I lived together for 2 years and had a kid before we got married. You know, I mean, I'm a living example of what it looks like for God to say, I'm telling you, this is the one for you. And then having to watch Dylan go through, like crawl through. Have you ever seen Shawshank Redemption?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
When he gets out of prison by crawling through the poo tunnel.
Yeah.
Like God told me this is the one
tunnel.
for you. And then I had to watch Dylan do that. You know?
Sure.
You know, and the whole time, you know, and we had lots of fights about marriage because what marriage means to me was something very different than it means to him because he wasn't raised Christian. He wasn't raised with the culture of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course.
Of course, now that we're married, we have conversations. And he's like, this is amazing. This is the best ever.
Yeah.
He's a sweet man.
He's a very sweet man, and
Hope
he
to meet him
loves
someday.
calling me his wife and stuff. I mean, it's just lovely. But Dylan had to get there on his own. He wasn't going to get there because I told him the Bible said so.
Yeah.
He was going to get there in a genuine way, and that's what I want for my kids. I don't want them doing anything because the Bible says so. I don't. I want them doing everything because it's been written on the tablet of their heart, and they understand why.
Yeah.
And so that's my goal with my kids.
That's awesome.
That and don't get pregnant because the world's going to force you to have a baby whether you want to or not.
Depends on which state you're in.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Anyway.
This one starting next year. North Carolinians. I don't know how you fall. There's probably plenty of people here that are pretty firmly anti-abortion, but whether or not abortion is legal in North Carolina will come down to how large the congressional state minority is in the next election. That will be the deciding factor, and whether or not abortion is legal or illegal in North Carolina after the next election.
I actually like that though, Andy, because if you can put it into the hands of the
yeah,
people.
but you haven't looked at how badly North Carolina is like gerrymandered on like a gold medal level.
So gerrymandering, yes, I understand that.
So the idea of representation is great, but the reality of it is pretty terrible. Does that make sense? In a lot of places, in North Carolina that's why there's been court case about North Carolina, because North Carolina is like gold medal level gerrymandered for the Republicans. What you're seeing in North Carolina is not complete representation. North Carolina is a divided state, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the level you're seeing, it's much more even, and they have like 60% of the seats, or the Republicans have like 60% of the seats, and that's not how the population falls. And if you just took a vote on whether the population at large thought nationwide, but probably also in North Carolina, at large thought that abortion should be legal, the majority is absolutely yes.
Yes, what?
Legal for legality.
That abortion is legal.
It's like 60% or a little bit better.
Okay,
nationwide.
so when I said, all right, so we
if
are
you're
a
going-
blue state because we have a Democratic, governor, and we are a blue state, and mostly on the western part and on the far eastern part. In the middle part of it's hard to say. I mean, we're mostly
it's just
Democratic.
like everywhere else. When you cram a bunch of people together, you get more.
But
you get more
gerrymandering
people
does
that are
screw
liberal.
things up, and I get that. And but I definitely think that the argument is still there for the federal government versus the state government versus all this. And again, we can't get into this, guys. It's going to take forever.
Too long.
But just let
me-
I am going to say this on a recording because I haven't said it on a recording yet. I'm going to say what Dave Chappelle said, and I know that it's harsh, but I like it. I like what he says, and it's something to think about. He says, I believe that the woman has the sole right to decide what happens to her body. I 100% agree. When it comes to her pregnancy, if she wants to terminate the pregnancy, I say she has that right. However, if she chooses to have that child, then the male has the right to abandon that child and not be held responsible for 18 years within the government. That is a weird thing to say, but think about the rights of both people.
So Let's not discuss this because I have a lot
so
of
many
thoughts.
opinions.
And mostly it has to do with if you're going to force women to have babies, then you need to hold the men accountable because it takes two people
But
to
that's
make a
the
baby.
point. If you're not going to force them to have babies, do you need to hold the man accountable?
It depends on, well,
It's just if the woman chooses to have the baby and the man did not want to have it. Not that I'm advocating this position, I'm clarifying.
but see now this, so then this again goes back to only women get to decide that life is sacred. Men just get to decide that life is not sacred and that we don't hold men accountable for the sacredness of
but
life.
does the
I mean,
man-
that's
but does the
absolutely
man
true.
have-
That's
Because
the
that
discussion.
creates, that furthers the situation that we're in now, which is my health care pays for the baby, not Dylan's.
Yeah.
My job, I have to figure out how to find childcare, which is $900 a month. I'm going to be on Blue Ridge Public Radio talking about how expensive childcare is. It takes two people to create a human being. And when we start allowing men to decide that that's not a sacred choice, we're in a really dangerous place.
I mean, there's
And
that's,
so
yeah.
I think culturally, just letting men off the hook and saying, well, if you want to make babies and not give a shit about them, that's fine. What does that tell men? What kind of a generation of men does that raise?
Yeah, but it takes both to make the child. It
Exactly.
takes
So both should be responsible.
So if the man says, I want you to have an abortion, and the woman says, no, that's okay.
Well, then I guess you should wear a condom.
But
Shouldn't you?
Is
You
that-
know what? I am so tired of men saying it's not my responsibility to be responsible for my sperm. Yes, it is. If you don't want to have a kid, wear a condom. If you don't want to have a kid, don't have sex. If you don't want to have a kid, then go get a vasectomy.
I love
There
that.
are lots
That's
of options
great.
for men. They don't take that choice. They don't take that
You're-
road.
I mean, she's not wrong, Rick.
I'm not-
If you
And
just
so
back
if-
up the point of decision, yeah. It,
No, if
Men,
you- it
every
looks the
man
same,
that
yeah.
makes a decision to ejaculate inside of a woman with no protection has made a decision to possibly roll the dice for a child. You
Yeah.
need to be responsible for
No,
that,
but you're-
period.
But that's like saying that the man, is the man saying to the woman, I'm not going to wear a condom.
Yes.
And the woman says, okay.
I cannot tell you how many stories I know of women saying, is there a condom on there? Laura McCleary, she's a
I
personality.
literally know a person right now that is pregnant because their partner chose to remove the condom during sex.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
this
I know that's like a thing
Yeah.
that I literally
And if a,
So
wo-
they're
if, now,
backing it
again,
up. I
if
mean-
a woman says, you don't need to wear a condom, again, you're an idiot then,
Not-
sir.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
You're an
So I'm
idiot.
guessing you didn't like what Dave Chappelle said.
No.
okay. We
Disagree.
need to back out of
Yeah,
this. 'cause
yeah,
we're
yeah,
gonna-
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's
Just so
not
you
that
both
it doesn't
know,
Yeah.
deserve discussion,
I love you
but we
both
need to
very
back
much,
out of this.
and everything is cool.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
This is all talking, and fortunately, I'm beyond having the kid thing, and I took care of all my kids.
Yeah.
My kids are with me, and I love them, and so I'm not going to make choices for everybody else in the world. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Are we rolling, Andy?